When Acho Ulu was a child growing up in Nigeria, his dad instilled in him the basics of safety, that every action has consequences and that preparation is critical. Since those early lessons from his father, Acho has built a career developing and implementing safety programs across a number of industries, seeing his role as one that helps a business succeed by ensuring safeguards are in place to prevent the worst-case scenarios from happening. As the Director of Environmental Health and Safety at Unibail-Rodamco-Westfield, a global developer and operator of retail and experiential destinations, Acho is collaborating with a cross-functional team to implement elaborate traffic and revenue-driving experiences for the company's flagship locations. Understanding the bottom-line implications of his safety recommendations is paramount. As he explains it, there just wouldn't be a safety department if there wasn't profitability and revenue.
Hi, my name is Acho Ulu, and I am the Health and Safety Director at Westfield, now called Unibail-Rodamco-Westfield, out of the Los Angeles headquarters here in Century City.
Tell me a little bit about Unibail-Rodamco-Westfield. What do they do?
We are a global developer of flagship retail destinations, what a lot of people would call malls. However, we've taken the malls and we flipped it and made it more experiential. So you come in for everything else and end up shopping. And that's the general idea behind our destinations, whereby you're coming, there's experiential entertainment, be it the movies, high-end dining, and sophisticated retail shopping as well.
What's typically involved in your safety program? Is it primarily focused on the retail employees, or do you have to consider the buildings or even the shoppers as well?
My function transcends your typical safety professional, whereby I'm not only looking at our employees, I'm also looking at the infrastructure in itself and keeping it safe, and also members of the public. So our customers, shoppers, other vendors and contractors. And the idea behind it is to bring people in and have them leave the way they came in. So not only am I involved with employees' day-to-day safety-related functions, I'm also looking at members of the public and how we can keep them safe as well.
So what other considerations have to go into devising a safety program? Because you're dealing with people who aren't going to be trained by your safety protocols.
Yes, and there lies the challenge, and I should say the opportunity that makes it a lot fun. So it starts off with our development and construction department. How can we design out some of this risk, right? It goes into trigonometry, the type of tiles we use, the transition between tiles, elevations, and other factors that may affect the safety of members of the public. Yes, so we have to look at inclement weather protocols, trigonometry, hazards associated with slip, trips, and falls, your walking working surfaces. We also engineer out for other risks where employees might not be exposed to, but members of the public. So my responsibilities far exceed employee health and safety. The challenge with dealing with members of the public and their safety is there is no prescribed, or should I say, regulatory agency that oversees public safety. So we have to get creative and rely on common sense here. And what are some of these hazards that can be eradicated to ensure the health and safety of members of the public? And that's where cross-functional collaboration comes in, spending a lot of time with your other functions such as design, architecture, construction, and looking at trends as well.
And if employees don't always follow what we're supposed to do to stay safe, how do you plan for the public to follow the rules and do what they're supposed to? How do you plan a safety program for something that seems to me almost unmanageable?
You have to simplify it to the basics when dealing with members of the public. There are a lot of sciences that go into predicting human behavior. However, if you're able to guide or influence human behavior to an acceptable end, then that's success. So a lot of signages, there's a lot of policing. And when I mean policing, I don't mean it in the brutal aspect of it or in the enforcement aspect of it, but I mean it in the social responsibility aspect. How can I use human capital to guide and predict human behavior? So having the necessary people at the necessary places, be it security guards, be it stewards, be it the concierge team we use, walking up to members of the public, asking them if they're lost, guiding them in the right directions, using a lot of signs and arrows to steer people in the right direction. We also take advantage of education and communication through the use of an intercom system.
So communication then stays critical. That's true in a lot of safety programs then.
Absolutely. And communication is even more critical when dealing with members of the public. There shouldn't be any room for confusion, any room for second guessing, and you simplify things to the most basic of terms. The idea behind dealing with members of the public is that common sense aspect has to be eradicated. You cannot rely on common sense when dealing with members of the public. We have to assume the worst case scenario and engineer out that worst case scenario, whatever it may be.
For a lot of companies, safety is seen as a must-do or it's something that directly impacts the success of the business. I've got to believe when you're talking about the operation of a flagship shopping mall like Westfield operates, I've got to believe the role of safety is very much elevated. So how is the safety function viewed within URW?
The safety function within URW is highly respected. It's a critical function of the whole organization as a whole. Each department, each manager, each employee is tasked with management business objectives around safety. It goes beyond your employees when dealing with a flagship destination, as you've mentioned. Our brand recognition is everything. The last thing you would want to happen is have a member of the public injured at one of our destinations. So therefore, safety is held highly.
What does a typical day look like for you?
There is no typical day for me. It all starts by looking at our performance indicators and see how we're trending. We have a very complex system we use to record and manage incidents. So my typical day starts with logging into that system, seeing the incidents for the day or for the previous day, and seeing if there's any opportunity to come up with corrective and preventive actions to prevent a recurrence, looking at a few emails, conducting a few risk assessments, event risk assessments. I work closely with the events team. And when they come up with fanciful and decorative ways of driving foot traffic to our malls, some of these ways or ideas that come up with are rather outlandish. So the beauty of having a risk management or a safety department is someone like me goes in and looks at this. The idea behind this is not to say no, but to set conditions in place to prevent an incident from happening. And it's fascinating how you can do things that may be considered quote unquote dangerous in a very safe manner and drive foot traffic to the centers, and everyone comes and leaves in the same manner. And that's what a successful day looks like to me. That's what experiential retail is all about.
You have to give me an example now of something that looks extremely dangerous, drives foot traffic, and everybody goes home the same way they came.
I'll give you a very good example. We had an event called the Crane Ballet, and it was an artistic depiction of a story where the idea behind it was to communicate the crisis of the transient population in that particular area. So it involved hanging modular houses on a crane, and the crane spins these houses in a 360-degree fashion where everyone within that community or every person within that community can look at this demonstration as a beacon from whatever distance. However, thinking about that and thinking how outlandish and crazy it sounds, it was remarkable. While this house is dancing in a 360 fashion to Louis Armstrong's song, was it called Beautiful Day? Was that Louis Armstrong? I'm sorry. But listening to Beautiful Day while the house spins in a 360 fashion was remarkable to see. And it was done in such a safe way that we did not compromise on the artistry of that depiction. However, there were no incidents associated with it. And that's a remarkable day in my industry.
Is this a full-size house or just a little bitty house?
It's not a little bitty house. It's a house big enough to comfortably stand 3 people.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. So it'll be the size of half your typical container.
And it's dangling up in the air, 30 feet in the air or something?
About 50 feet in the air. And while the crane spins it around in a 360 fashion, not so fast, but captivating enough to keep the minds of people interested and enticed while music plays. So the crane the house dances in the air to music, and you have a body of people, an ocean of people just standing and watching this display. And it was incredible.
Wow. Yeah, you don't get that every day. If you wanted to make a change to something across all of the properties, if you wanted to change something in your safety program or processes that are in place, how would you go about making that change?
So it depends on what changes I'm trying to make. Now, if I'm trying to make changes that would affect the way business is done day to day, I would have to solicit the collaboration and cooperation of a cross-functional team, justifying the business case for that change, relating it to the bottom line. I always pride myself in my ability to understand the financial implications of a business. What does it look like? Why are we here? Without financing, we would not have a safety department without profitability and revenue. So it always comes back to the bottom line. Injuries have a huge impact on your bottom line, on your finances. So justifying an incident through numbers is always a metric I use in communicating the need for changes in safety or the investment, the capital investment in safety.
I want to talk a little bit about a prior role. I want to talk about explosives and pyrotechnics. Earlier in your career, you spent some time at a company called Special Devices, who specialized in, and I quote, precision engineered energetic devices, which sounds awfully intriguing to me. What sorts of industries does SDI serve?
SDI, now known as Ensign Bigford, serves the aerospace industry, the automotive industry, and the Department of Defense, the military. So essentially, they produced explosives and explosives that could be used across multiple applications. They were the biggest independent manufacturers and still are of your airbag initiators, those little explosive devices that go inside of your airbags that deploy on impact. Hopefully deploy on impact is what Ensign Bigford now produces. They produced a variety of warheads, utilized by the Department of Defense, the military, for different applications. They produced heavy explosives for the construction industry, be it C4 and dynamite, for creating roadways in challenging topographies, and a host of other ornaments for the Department of Defense.
Well, what goes through your mind when you're considering a safety role at a company that builds devices to blow things up?
Well, at the time, to be quite honest, nothing went through my mind. I initially started my career at the biotech and pharmaceutical world. I remember at the time I was an intern at Amgen, and unfortunately, there was a hiring freeze. And my manager, who belonged to the school's alumni organization, had told me of an opening in a company nearby. She wasn't very descriptive about what this organization did, but being young and innately curious, I needed a job. So she reached out to the manager at the time, who was a member of the school's alumni organization, and I was interviewed. Now, here's an interesting story. During my interview, one of the supervisors walks in, calls the manager, and they both walk out together. About 10 minutes later, the manager comes in, suspends the interview, and has me leave. So I left without explanation. I didn't know why I was asked to leave. I didn't know what the heck just happened. And I was driving home confused. Being young in age at the time, I thought I had bumped. I said I'd failed woefully to express myself in the best light. I thought I had perhaps sold myself short. And I didn't hear back from this organization for about 8 months. 8 months later, I get a call saying, "Hey, are you still interested in this position?" I didn't know exactly how to feel, but in order not to burn bridges, I went back, concluded the interview, and I was given an offer. And this was my first real safety job. My first day at work, I was told that there was an explosion at the facility that led to a very catastrophic injury. And I don't want to talk about the level of seriousness, but it was something that would make the average person buckle in the knees. And at that point, I knew that I had my work cut out for me. It was either fight or flight. And I was inclining more so towards flight than fight. My first day also at the job, there were a few explosions, the loudest thing you've ever heard. And the building kind of rattles when these explosions are initiated. However, we had the safeguards in place, the engineering controls to withstand that amount of an explosion. But it was an interesting thing to see. No pun intended, but coming from the pharmaceutical world, the biotech world, where every day was pretty much innocuous. And I knew at that moment, safety was serious. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't cookie cutter. It wasn't paper pushing. Safety is a commitment to preventing serious injuries that could even lead up to fatalities, as this was the case, or serious injuries as amputations or permanent stigmas that people would have to live through for the rest of their lives.
So I felt as a safety professional, my job was to do everything I can to prevent another of such incident from happening again. And that's where my commitment was shaped. And I realized safety is sacrifice. So in working with this industry, we went 4 years with no recordable incidents, not even the first aid incidents. We had tightened up the culture. We had developed policies and practices and educated the workforce. It was then I learned the difference between training and education. My mentor had said to me at the time, listen, you train animals because animals expect a treat. They do something for a treat, but you educate humans because humans require the need to understand why things are done. It's not necessarily for a treat, but in this case, it's about saving lives. It's about going home the way you showed up to work.
You've had the chance to work in a number of different industries across your career. Is there any in particular that had a bigger impact on your career than the others?
As you've mentioned, I worked across a vast array of industries, and it's been intentional in some areas, and it's been quite unfortunate in other areas as well. My goal when I got into safety was to apply myself across a vast array of industries. I wanted to know everything from food and drug to biotech, construction, real estate, and the automotive and aerospace industry. And I can say 15 years later, I've done that. I wanted to be a well-rounded safety professional, and that's what I am today. So by a combination of unfortunate circumstances and fortunate circumstances, I've been able to accomplish my dream in being a well-rounded safety professional. As far as what industries I like, I wouldn't say I prefer a particular industry over the other because the commitment to safety is to ensure the well-being of the entire workforce, and in some cases, members of the public as well. And doing that, the return of investment is immediate, the satisfaction is immediate. So I wouldn't say I have a particular preferred industry. However, I am a child with innate curiosity. That's the way I define myself. I love learning, I love new experiences, and that's reflected on my background. With Unibail-Rodamco-Westfield, I get to play with ideas. No 2 days are the same with the events, as I alluded to earlier. We have to come up with ingenious ways of driving foot traffic and having to look at the risk associated with those events, knowing that my goal is not to say no, but come up with safeguards and conditions to prevent the worst case scenario. Makes it very, very exciting. And we are also developers of flagship destinations as well. So high-end construction I find to be really interesting. Getting to play with 300,000-ton cranes and helicopters for lifting rooftop units makes it exciting to show up to remote places and watch these things take place.
Do you think it's your natural curiosity that drew you to the safety career in the first place?
I have a very interesting story on how I got into safety. And this starts with my childhood. My father schooled here in the United States and was transferred back to Nigeria, where he worked for one of the leading oil and gas industries globally. And being stationed in Nigeria at the time, the company incentivized its employees by rewarding those employees that understood the importance of health and safety. And that transcended the workplace. They also looked at the health and safety of your family as well. Being hurt as a child, you'd be taken to a hospital that's owned and run by the company he worked for at the time. And of course, there's a cost associated with that. So the safer you were at home and your children, the more of an incentive you received or the higher the bonus you received. So my father was really strict on safety at home. And I just kept hearing, do it safely or be safe or don't get hurt. Or if you get hurt, you get dealt with. And I need my money, so stay safe. And all I heard was safety, safety, safety growing up. I now got into college because I was passionate about medicine. And fast forward a couple of years later, being in college and being a pre-med student, I took a course, never forget this course, but it was in human anatomy. And I had to cut a human cadaver or flesh. And I discovered at that point that wasn't for me. And I went to seek the help of an advisor. And I said, hey, I'm in my third year in college. I'm confused and I've decided medicine is not for me. What can I do? And she asked me a question. She goes, what are you passionate about? I go, obviously, I'm passionate about saving lives. And she goes, have you thought about a non-medical life-saving career? And I was like, what is that? And then she talked to me about safety engineering and working as a safety professional. And something lit in my head. Being predisposed to that as a child, it was instant. I found my answer instantaneously and decided to embark on this journey of safety. So I started with a few internships, the first one being with Anheuser-Busch and then with Amgen. And I said, this is for me. This is not medicine. But the goal remains the same. We're preventing incidents from happening, and we're managing incidents that have already happened and preventing recurrences. And there was my satisfaction. There's an investor in the entire organization and not just his job. With every organization, I try to tell people getting into the safety field, get a full understanding of the organization you work for. Who are your internal customers? What's the product? What are the people like? What are the policies before you get into the policies and the procedures? With every organization I've worked for, with the exception, well, I shouldn't say the exception of this, but in most organizations I've worked for, I've put myself in the most menial of tasks. I've spent a couple of days doing multiple positions, understanding my internal customers, putting myself in their positions, understanding their frustrations, understanding the difficulties they deal with, experiencing those difficulties before trying to effect any type of change in the organization. And that's the difference between a good safety professional and a great safety professional. I said, after all, we're in the business of preventing injuries and saving lives. And it takes an act of humility to be able to do that. Knowing what you don't know and looking to learn in areas where you fall short differentiates you from the rest. I have yet another story to tell, and this was with the same industry where I began my career. I had just come out of college and I felt I knew everything. I knew OSHA regulations back of my head. I could recite to you Title 8, CCR, and quote every regulation there was out there that had to do with an engineering environment, particularly the machine shops. So walking into the machine shop where I felt I was talented at, and this was academic talent, I walked in there and tried to communicate to some tenured machinists on how hazardous some events there were, how hazardous some activities they were conducting were. And I was walked out of the machine shop aggressively. I walked right into my boss's office and I said to him, I don't think this is for me. The guys out there hate me. And he asked me, why do you think that is? It's only your second day on the job. I said, I walked in there telling them what to do and how to do it safely. And my boss laughed and said to me, you're very lucky that you walk into a group of 5 machinists who've been on the job for 30 years and they're unionized and nothing against the union. And you tell them how to do things safely. And there hasn't been one incident in that machine shop in 10 years. What do you think you did wrong? I couldn't figure it out. I said to him, I did everything right. I stand by what I said. I made sure the regulations I quoted was right. And I told them that they could get in trouble if they don't do things the right way. And he goes, you think they care about trouble? I had to stop and think about it. And at the moment, when I realized what they cared about, I went back to that machine shop and I communicated it the right way. I said, I care about you guys, and I know you care about yourselves as well. You care about your family, you care about your kids, and you want to go home safely. Here's what I was trying to prevent. I was trying to prevent this type of incident from happening. I want you to go back home the way you came in. I'm invested in your welfare, and I care about you. And forget the regulations or the standards. If you do things this way, you reduce the likelihood of an incident or an accident happening. At that point, I was successful, and I learned a very vital lesson that would always stay with me through and shape the history of my career. And it was at that moment I realized effective communication, caring about the people you work for, investing in that institution, understanding the people, the process before you start quoting regulations and policies. And it was a very important lesson that shaped the way I think.
What's the favorite lesson you learned from your dad?
My favorite lesson I learned from my dad as far as safety goes is there are definitely consequences for actions taken. And every action has to be reviewed. And you always have to prepare for the consequences. So learning that at an early age, I knew that I could take an action, no matter how dangerous it seemed, if I had the controls in place to prevent the worst case scenario from transpiring. So no pun intended, I have this saying, right? I came up with this saying. I always say this at every interview I go to or I participate in, that there's always a safe way to do a stupid thing. And it might boil down to cost. The cost of having the safeguards in place might be overwhelming and insurmountable. So therefore, we don't execute that quote unquote unsafe action. However, in my case as a child, I knew if I'd climbed up the mango tree and if I'd fallen and hurt myself, the consequences was far going to exceed the thrill of me climbing the tree. What did I do? I told my older brother, hey, help me with this mattress. We're going to put a mattress right here. Just in case I fall, I'll land on this mattress. And at an early age, I understood safeguarding. I understood engineering controls. I understood you can have controls in place to prevent the worst case scenario. Or even if you have the worst case scenario, the outcome is not as dire. So learning that from my dad at an early age was definitely remarkable and helped shape the professional I am today.
So you used a mattress for fall protection. Did it work?
I used the mattress for fall protection. Exactly.
Did it work?
I failed a few times, yes. And I'm here to tell you I broke no bones. I suffered no serious injuries. And I was able to, the mattress was effective in absorbing the impact of my fall or bracing my fall in certain cases.
And did your dad know about this?
Absolutely not. He just knew I wasn't hurt. He knew I didn't visit the medical facility. And he made his bonuses at the end of the year for keeping his kids safe. That's what he knew.
When you had your awakening at this explosives company and realized that safety isn't just about excitement, safety is serious, it's not a joke. Did that change your perception of safety in the other industries you'd worked in?
It definitely changed my outlook on safety. And it heightened my commitment because every industry had work. I remember working for an industry that was just a logistics and shipping facility. And I came in with such an aggressive commitment to safety where I looked at every opportunity for an injury and I tried to prevent everything from happening. It wasn't limited to recordable injuries. It wasn't limited to serious injuries. I even looked at first aid injuries. How can we prevent Band-Aids from being used? And I was told that my approach was a little aggressive. It was a little overkill for an industry like this. However, learning what I'd learned and being through my experience, I learned that it's not so much about the outcome. It's about the causation. Because a single cause can have a variety of outcomes. And that outcome might be a fatality. It might be a first aid. You cannot always predict outcomes, but you can prevent causations from happening. I'll give you an example. Something as simple as a blade cut, right? Someone cutting through a box and cuts himself. You don't know if that particular employee has a pre-existing condition that prevents his blood from clotting and might bleed out from an incident that the majority of people would consider a first aid. Or why I just slashed my finger, I'll put a Band-Aid over it, and I'm fine. However, you have an employee that cuts a finger or has a minor cut in the finger and bleeds out. And I've actually experienced a situation like that where an employee was changing a light bulb at night, fell from a ladder and had a minor gash in his head, but had a blood clot disease and bled out to death because there was no one there. He didn't take advantage of the buddy system program that existed. He did this alone in solitude and unfortunately passed in solitude. So focusing on outcomes, a lot of the times, it's not a justifiable approach. Eliminating the cause. Let's prevent this injury, no matter how minor it seems. Let's prevent this from happening so that way we can control the outcome. And that's what I learned working at that explosives industry. All causes have to be accounted for and prevented.
But don't you start with the outcome and work your way backwards to the causes?
That would be a lagging indicator. Prevention is a better measure of behavior, right? An evolved culture would start from prevention. And an evolving culture would usually look at lagging indicators like what was the outcome? Now let's work our way back to the causation and prevent it from happening or prevent a recurrence or come up with a corrective action. But I always say this, an evolved culture does not wait for things to happen. It works hard to prevent things from happening.
How do you create an evolved culture?
It comes with education. The hows, the whys, the know-hows versus training, right? Usually it starts with training. Here are the consequences for not following guidelines and procedures and protocols and all of these administrative programs, right? But when you train humans to know these are the reasons why we shouldn't do things this way. We are invested in your welfare. Think about the reasons, your whys. Why do I show up to work every day? Your family, could be your wife, it could be your kids. And the whole purpose of safety is to return you home the same way you came to work, right? And there's something in it for everyone. For the organization, we know that happy employees do their best work and show up to work excited every day, right? Hurt employees, right, don't necessarily do their best work. They work in fear. They work in situations where they don't quite understand what's going on. They don't understand the reasons behind these policies and procedures and programs. They just know that there are consequences for not following. And we know that rules are made to be broken. Humans are bound to violate rules, right? But when we understand that the consequences of our actions, if it was truly a mistake, right, would not be dire, then we can put our best foot forward, do our best work, show up to work with an understanding of why we do the things we do, why we're trained or educated the way we are, and knowing that that organization or that individual, being a safety professional, is invested in your culture, in your welfare. Knowing that there's a difference between education and training. And an evolved culture, right, or a working culture starts with education.
When you think about impacts to the business, then, do you think there's such a thing as a minor accident?
When you look at the mind of a safety professional, I always say this to safety professionals. When you go inside of a business, you have to remember and bear in mind that this is a business. The sole purpose of a business is money, revenue. And if there is no business, there's no need for you. So always think about the business and think how safety impacts the bottom line. How can I make this about the bottom line? One, our commitment to the health and safety of the employees is a no-brainer. You can't come in there without that sacrificial ability. However, how does that impact the bottom line? Because fortunately and unfortunately, that's what it might take to get that buy-in at the executive level. At that level, it might take a lot of times a financial conversation to get their attention. Unfortunately, they might not be as evolved as safety professionals as we are. So I always say, in every situation, in my world, when it comes to executing events, right, to drive, in my current position, foot traffic, because foot traffic translates to revenue, I always say, I never say no. I never say no to any event, no matter how risky it may be, right? And that's the difference between education and training. I set conditions in place to address the worst case scenarios, those incidents we're trying to prevent. How can we get this done? And if that cause materializes, how can we keep the outcome to a minimum? And then I present that back to the team and say, hey, take a look at this and tell me if you really want to do this. Do you want to do this based on your understanding of what the outcomes may be and the guards we have in place? Is that a decision you would make as a business owner? And a lot of times they answer these questions for themselves, right? But being a prescriptive safety professional hardly ever works. You cannot police safety. You cannot police safety. You always have to be invested in the business, invested in the people, and make a well-informed decision.
The idea of creating an evolved safety culture is an interesting one, going from one where the focus is on lagging indicators to a culture where everyone understands the consequences of their actions, that employees understand the why behind the safety policies and procedures, where there's something in it for everyone, including the organization. It's a culture where investing in safety, investing in the people, helps leaders make informed decisions and positively impacts the bottom line of the business. This is Kathleen Finato from True Software. Join me again as I talk to safety leaders across a wide range of industries to understand how what drives them in their field is also driving the success of their companies. It's no accident.